Good morning on this Sunday, December 9th. I'm Lori Geary filling in for Dick Williams, who is feeling a little under the weather. Today on the Georgia Gang, we'll be discussing the results of the runoff elections, including the Secretary of State's race. The governor-elect Brian Kemp extends an olive branch to Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, and some Dems plan to boycott Kemp's first major speech since the election. The panel is ready to discuss these topics and so much more now on the Georgia Gang.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
So let's get right to it. If history were any indication, then there were no surprises in this week's runoff. The Republicans racked up wins in the Public Service Commission race and the contest for Secretary of State.
Excited and humbled that I'm going to be your next Secretary of State.
After an extra 4 weeks on the campaign trail, Republican Brad Raffensperger claimed victory, defeating former Congressman John Barrow by about 60,000 votes in the runoff. Barrow, who raised more money than the Republican, ran as a moderate, but it wasn't enough to get his supporters back out to vote. Although the general election saw record turnout statewide, about 1/5 of those voters returned to the ballot box in the runoff. Barrow released a statement saying in part, quote, "Though the outcome was not what we had wanted, what we're working for is more important than ever. Elections that are as fair and as accurate as they are secure. In these polarized times, that may seem like a never-ending struggle, but it's a struggle that's always worth the fight." Raffensperger has a tough job ahead of him, answering to lawsuits over voting issues in the general election and replacing Georgia's 16-year-old voting machines.
I want to make sure that elections are clean, fair, and accurate. And that's the number one priority as your next Secretary of State.
And in the PSC race, Chuck Eaton defeated Democrat Lindy Miller by roughly the same margin. Darren, I want to start with you. Why do Democrats just not show up in the runoffs?
You know what, that is the unsolved mystery. I mean, historically in Georgia, we've seen that Republicans always do better in runoff. We've had some victories in sort of local races. If you look at the mayor's race in Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottoms won her runoff. Kasim Reed won his runoff. And if you look at places like Augusta and Savannah and Muskogee County, locally, Democrats and particularly minority voters tend to come back out. But it's just in statewide races, if you just looked at the early vote numbers very early on in the race, you saw 50 and older white men and white women who were voting at an enormously higher rate than minorities. And so going forward, Democrats have got to figure out a way to fix that in these runoff elections.
Phil, let's get your take on this. Republicans are able to get their core supporters out to the polls in a runoff. Why is that?
Well, I think that in this cycle, the gubernatorial election was so close. I think the Republicans really mobilized. I noticed a lot more mobilization for the runoff on December 4th than I did on November 6th, frankly. And then, you know, the Stacey Abrams campaign, as we all admitted, was very well run. They had volunteers knocking on doors. The African-American vote simply faded away for the runoffs because Stacey Abrams and that energy that we saw in the general election campaign really faded. And to Theron's point, they do have to figure out how to get back a turnout, because Georgia is one of the few states in the union with a runoff, so it's going to be with us for a while.
Right. Alexis, did Stacey Abrams miss an opportunity here because it was all about voter suppression in the general election? We didn't see much of her.
Well, she was pretty active. I got lots of emails, lots of calls encouraging me to come back out to vote in the runoff. But I think people were just so disappointed. You know, it was sort of a devastating loss because it looked so good and she was ahead in the polls even at some point that they just said, okay, it's over, we're done, we're not going to come back. And that's too bad because every vote counts and they should have come back.
A lot was at stake. And Phil, let me ask you, because Brad Raffensperger has a tough job ahead. He's going to look at replacing the 16-year-old voting machines. What does he need to do in terms of overcoming all of these problems, these issues, and also the lawsuits?
Well, at last count, I think there were over a dozen state and federal lawsuits about some of this was just phony voter suppression, which I think will be eliminated down the road. But Brad Raffensperger's #1 priority will be to oversee a new electronic voting system with what he said he would like to have a paper trail that could be audited. And of course the legislature, that'll be a topic as we go into January. And I think, as we pointed out here, there's problems in all 159 counties. and the Secretary of State simply oversees and then certifies. So just Fulton County, where I live, we've had problems for years, including fraud with provisional ballots. We've talked about this on the gang, where people aren't getting the right addresses, and sometimes intentionally, and those are going to have to be thrown out. Raffensperger, just to quickly wrap up, says he's going to follow the Kemp policy of you have to have matches to have an effective electoral integrity.
But Lori, if I can jump in here, you know, right next door in North Carolina in Congressional District 9, it basically showed that in that election that there were Republican operatives going door to door, you know, where 1,000 absentees ballots were taken from people who they was basically lying to voters and scamming the ballots to make sure that if they had voted for Democrats, to basically take the ballots and never turn them into the actual voting offices. And then so I think that as Secretary of State-elect Raffensperger comes in, he's going to look at things like in North Carolina, and I think that we do all admit that there were voting problems. I think that what Barrow did during his campaign is really highlight some of those, and so now it's going to be really interesting to see how swift this new Secretary of State will come out and admit that, look, we've got some challenges going forward, and work with these counties, bring them to Atlanta, go to them, and really do an anecdotal deep dive on what really happened on Election Day, because next year this time we're going to have some elections that are going to be coming up that are going to be pretty important.
And Alexis, is there any room for Republicans and Democrats to work together on these voting issues?
Well, I hope they will, because everybody agrees that every vote should count, right? So I hope they will work together. But the main thing is, I think the Secretary of State does have the responsibility for coordinating and training and making sure that everything is in place and in order to run smoothly. And I also think that they want to make sure that the exact match thing may be thrown out, because even though it was a policy initially that Kemp put in place, the legislature endorsed it with a law that they passed, and that's one of the things that's being challenged in court. So that is potentially
I want to correct that a little bit. A Democratic legislature in the 1990s started to have the exact match, and then Brian Kemp, and I want to emphasize this, was following the law. He didn't make all of this up.
He didn't make the law, but the law was made after he had the policy that was challenged in court that was set aside, and then the legislature came
Only
back.
one part of that was set aside, which I don't agree with, a lot of people don't, and that was the birth date. I don't understand people who don't understand what their birth date is.
Okay, let me jump in because I want to move on, because there was also a very interesting race that we didn't hear that much about. But Phil, if you don't think your vote counts, you only have to look to Habersham County and the state rep race up there.
That's exactly right. That was a real interesting one on the December 4th runoff involving Representative Dan Gassaway, and he won by 3 votes against his opponent, and of course they're still counting some provisional ballots and some overseas ballots. So we don't know if Representative Gassaway is going to be returning or not. It's a Republican district, so a Republican will keep that seat.
I don't remember a race that close in recent times.
No.
In Augusta, there was an incumbent that won by 12 votes, but this may be a record in the state of Georgia.
Wow.
And why was there a do-over? Because this kind of gets into the voting issues.
This goes into what Theron and I are talking about. It was a complete screw-up by the local Board of Elections. For a couple of years, people were voting in the wrong legislative district, and then somebody said, oh my gosh, these voters are in the wrong district. So it had nothing to do with the Secretary of State. It's just something that has to be corrected, to your point, at the local level.
And you had in the primary races and also in the general election races where people were voting in the wrong state house and some in the wrong state senate district. But one of the things that Governor-elect Kemp said this week, and when he was talking to some group of people, one of the things that I was very shocked to know is that Georgia, unlike a lot of other states, we have a lot of special elections. You got to think about it. People don't decide to run again, or the governor appoints people, and so doing these special elections, it takes the Secretary of State's time to really clean up the voting rolls. And so that's why while we started a purge of 1.4 million people, had he been able to kind of clean the list along the way, you wouldn't have seen that sort of massive purge. He would have been able to do it year to year, but we had a lot of special elections.
All right. All right. Well, coming up, we have a very interesting topic to discuss. Brian Kemp extends an olive branch to Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. We'll discuss right after the break.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
We had an interesting development this week when the governor-elect Brian Kemp actually walked over to Atlanta City Hall, meeting with Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. Theron, just want to get your take on this.
Well, listen, I think that Governor-elect Kemp realizes that there was a partnership between former Mayor Kasim Reed and now Governor Nathan Deal, where you saw the state and the city benefit from that relationship. Now, let me be clear. There were times where Kasim Reed and Nathan Deal disagreed. You may remember around the issue around sanctuary cities and Atlanta being a welcome city. And so they didn't always agree on everything, but 75% of the things that they worked together were successful. So, look, I think it was really good for Mayor Bottoms to say, all right, the election is over. It's a difference between being opposed to someone during the campaign and them being your enemy. And so I think that she was very happy that the governor-elect came over to City Hall and met with her. And from the reports, it looks like they had a very productive conversation about economic development. I think the airport came up. So that's something that I think legislators and the council members are glad that these two are trying to work together.
Phil, this is important because Nathan Deal and Kasim Reed, as Theron mentioned, really set the bar high on this. I mean, they were written, there were articles written about their relationship, about Republicans working with Democrats, really helping the economic development here in Georgia. So how important is this meeting, especially in the beginning?
It's very important. The media really doesn't focus on some of the bipartisan things that occur. Everyone in our congressional delegation, Democrat, Republican, the mayors of Atlanta, the governors of the state, for example, support the expansion of the port of Savannah. Right. That's another one. Obviously, we have an airport here that's a gem in this state for economic development. You have to try to keep the lines of communication open. So it's an obligation on both of these officials, to take this example, to try to keep the lines of communication open. Yes, they're not always going to agree, but there are going to be things that we can agree on for the betterment of the state.
Yeah. And Alexis, on this note, this week it was announced that there are 2 state representatives who will be boycotting Brian Kemp's first major speech to lawmakers at the biennial in Athens. Think that's a good idea?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it's a good idea to do that, because he hasn't really done anything yet and they need to know what he's going to say. But I think there's still some really strong feelings about the election, and particularly his part in it as the Secretary of State, overseeing an election in which he was running for a higher office. So I think that it's going to take some time for everybody to sort of come around, but I do think it's going to be up to the governor-elect to, put out those olive branches to bring people together. So let's hope that he'll do that with his speech.
Phil, first up was the Atlanta mayor. Now, what does Brian Kemp do with the legislature?
Well, obviously, we're going to be seeing an agenda that's going to be rolled out over the next couple of months. In fact, right now, you're going to have both party caucuses in the legislature filling out their agenda. I'm sure we're going to be going over that in future shows. But Brian Kemp has an obligation to obviously explain to the people what his priorities are. I think it's disgraceful that 2 Democrats don't want to show up. We just talked about there are areas where we can have bipartisan agreement for the betterment of the state. And I would hope that most Democrats would rise above something like that, because a lot of this, and you watch the legislature just like I do, Theron, I would say 80% of the bills that are passed and the amendments that are passed are basically agreed upon, and there's compromises by both sides.
Theron, there's a lot of healing to be done in this state. What does Brian Kemp need to do?
Well, he's got to keep this going. I mean, for him to, again, symbolically go over to City Hall and meet with, I believe the most popular Democrat in our state. And then now he's got to, say, all right, what are some of the legislative and policy issues that he can compromise with Democrats on? And I think he's got maybe 1 or 2 more opportunities to reach out to not only the African-American community, but he also has got to reach out to the Hispanic community. And I think that one of the things that if you really know about Brian Kemp is that he likes to create jobs. I mean, you look at his private record, he was really big on job creation, small businesses. And so I think there may be some opportunities where he can work with cities and counties in the metro area to try to, bring together some development.
But just very quickly, I think it goes both ways. Stacey Abrams needs to cool down her militant rhetoric, and she's hurting the image of the state of Georgia, claiming that this was not a democratic, a free election. That's outrageous. Well, we have elections where you win and you lose, and then the other party tries to win again.
I want to get to MARTA, because we've had a big development in MARTA this week.
Yeah, but that's not a good interpretation of what actually is happening with Stacey Abrams, so I just want to put that in, but go ahead.
Okay. A big vote for MARTA this week, extending rail service to Clayton County. Good idea, Phil?
I think so. I think that with our population growth and what our 29 counties that now make up Metro Atlanta, I think people have to be rethinking our whole transportation system. Clayton County several years ago had MARTA, and then they lost it. Now it's back again. So I think I'm glad to see this.
It's been a long time discussion.
Yeah, and this vote was important because now it enables them to basically extend and continue the federal planning process. And so I know that there was a lot of confusion about the vote, but now it allows MARTA to work with their congressional leaders and partners to continue the federal process. I think this is wonderful at a time where, you know, you got a big vote coming up in March to Gwinnett. So for Gwinnett to see that it's working in Clayton, and I think some of the other people will fall in line.
Still a long way to go on the Clayton issue, because I think its construction could begin in 2023 and perhaps passengers could start in 2027.
Correct.
But Theron, Clayton was first out of the gate to support MARTA after Fulton and DeKalb. I mean, they passed the referendum in 2014. So this says a lot that, hey, if you put your money where your mouth is, we're going to come down and support you.
Yeah, there was a robust debate in the legislature. You know, for so long, the city of Atlanta, Fulton County, and DeKalb were the only three entities that were paying into MARTA. Then, of course, Clayton came on board. And you're right, Lori, it's been almost 4 years since they've actually been able to see this come to fruition. So again, if you put money in the game, you got a little skin in the game, you're patient, ultimately good things happen with the county.
All right. Well, coming up, we have some water issues yet again that we're going to discuss with the city of Atlanta, and Sandy Springs is putting some pressure on the city of Atlanta over some water rates. We'll be back.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
This one seems like a broken record. Imagine the city of Atlanta having water issues. Let's talk about the economic impact one water issue can have on businesses across Atlanta. Phil, why don't you weigh in on this?
Well, absolutely, and it was actually shocking to see what happened at the water treatment plant there on Howell Mill Road. It's almost like we're a third world country. Apparently the maintenance workers didn't know what was going on for a while, and the water was shut off. But to your point, Lori, hundreds of thousands of dollars were lost if we just think of the ripple effect to businesses, coffee shops, you name it, that had, and then we had a water boiling alert for over a day. It's sad to see.
Yeah, well, weigh in on this.
Well, the watershed commissioner, and I'm going to quote her, she said basically, in the watershed commissioner, Keisha Powell, stated that the computer system was, they were seeing that there was something that was not, normal, and actually to their point where it was actually a rising sort of water rate in the pipes. And so I think they sort of proactively jumped on this and said, all right, well, let's make sure we don't have a bigger problem, but let's maybe shut down for a little bit. So yeah, I agree. I think that there were some businesses that were hit, but more importantly, I do want to commend them for tackling the issue, and I think they did from a communication standpoint. They communicated with the voters and communicated with the citizens.
Where were the backup systems here? I understand the technology was failing, but where are the backup systems? It's like the power failure at the airport. Where were the backup systems?
Well, they got an upgrade system in place, and so I think, again, there was definitely a little bit of time period there where some businesses and residents were sort of temporarily affected, but ultimately they got it fixed with the next day, and then things got back to normal.
Surprising there was another issue?
Well, it is, no, not in a big city with big operations. I mean, things happen, and that wasn't a major thing. I mean, and they, like as Theron said, they got right on it and they got it solved. So I think, this stuff just happens.
Phil, let me ask you, because Sandy Springs is really putting it to the city of Atlanta, because the city of Atlanta provides water to the city of Sandy Springs. They're saying, that there's this surcharge of 21%. Where is this surcharge coming from, and can you prove that it's legal to charge us this?
Well, and that's what Mayor Rusty Paul of Sandy Springs has been saying for several years now, and as a Sandy Springs resident, we've been ripped off for several years by the city of Atlanta. So I think we need a Trumpian art of the deal here with the city of Atlanta to get a better deal for Sandy Springs. And I hope that we can do this through negotiations rather than through the courts.
But also the sort of centerpiece of this story, Lori, is that Sandy Springs has been sending over some open records requests to the city of Atlanta. But the city of Atlanta basically responded and said, look, some of these things that they're asking for in open records requests is just basically beyond the pale. I mean, they're asking for stuff that the city, number one, can't disclose, and they would be basically, breaking federal law. And so I think that, while there's going to be a legal, I mean, they filed a suit, so now the city and Sandy Springs are going to have to fight this out in court. But I think the city really kind of pushed back on some of the comments.
But they're refusing to compromise, and not all those documents that are being asked for, have to be sealed. Too.
Yeah, but I think one thing you can say about this administration, unlike past administrations, is that they definitely have been complying with the open records request.
Well, that's not true, but that's a debate
well, they're
for
doing
another
better.
day.
They're doing much better.
Okay, I'm going to go with
better.
that. Yeah, but look at this blanket hosanna to your mayor is
Alexis,
ridiculous.
I want to stay on the city of Atlanta because this week we also learned that Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms has opened up an investigation to how Kwanzaa Hall got a job with the city with less than a year out after leaving city council.
Right. And I think that is something that she had to do because when it became known to the public that this happened, she didn't know about it because he was apparently hired before the end of the last term. And the deal was done without her knowing about it. And so she found out about it after the fact. So she wants to get to the bottom of it and see what happened so it won't happen again because it actually was not a legal act to do that.
And Phil, to me, I would think that this is an easy investigation. You just ask Kwanzaa Hall who hired you.
Well, amen to that. And it's a little hard to believe months go by and your mayor, who's, doesn't know anything about it, that kind of, you wonder about her staff and the communication lines there. So I think it was wrong. We've discussed this on the panel before. And, if this is a mayor of ethics, she needs to step up pretty quickly.
Well, I think, you know what I'm going to say. Let's not rush to judgment. But this is an ongoing investigation. I think the one thing that the mayor should be commended on, Lori, is that, she has brought in an outside set of eyes on this to say, hey, let's look at what happened before she became mayor. I think that she stands by, hiring Kwanzaa for that job, former city councilman Kwanzaa Hall for the job. However, if there was some illegal activity, unethical activity that was done before she became mayor to get him this job, or more importantly, give him some money that was reported on that he was given without her knowing, then I think that just shows you a lot about this mayor, where she really just wants to get to the bottom of it. And then once it all comes out, then she'll make a decision on how to move forward.
Real quickly, I just want to discuss the booting issue. Phil, DeKalb County is cracking down on the most frustrating thing for drivers, I think, if you've ever been booted. What do you think about this?
We need to eliminate booting, and I was really hopeful the Atlanta City Council would follow in the footsteps of many other jurisdictions and counties around the state. And unfortunately, they wimped out, and they said they'd have bigger signs to warn people and all of this kind of stuff. And it stemmed, as we all know, from a very tragic incident with a so-called booter that actually shot somebody in some sort of argument. So I hope at some point Atlanta City Council, our capital city of the state, would eliminate it.
All right, well, that wraps up this segment. This show goes really fast. Coming up next, we'll have winners and losers.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Welcome back to one of our favorite segments. It's winners and losers. And Alexis, let's begin with you.
All right, I'm going to start with Tyler Perry. He paid off $434,000 worth of layaway at two different stores at Walmart's in Metro Atlanta for people who can have a happy Christmas now.
He does so much for the community.
It's exciting.
He's on my list, so I'll cross that one off.
All right, and then Orrin Hudson, he received a George W.H. Bush Point of Light Award this week as part of the celebration of the life of George Bush. And he got it at Andrews Air Force Base earlier this week. And congratulations to him. He's the founder and head of Be Someone, which is an organization that teaches children how to help themselves through the game of chess, be winners on the chessboard and in life.
And he's been doing that for so many years.
Long time. And then I want to congratulate Brennan Dicker. He's the new executive director of the, I can't read my own writing. What does that say? Of this Creative Media Industries Institute at Georgia State University. He's been appointed to that as a new institute to support the film industry here in Atlanta and Georgia. And congratulations to him, and it was his birthday. And one more, I'm going to congratulate Rochelle Robinson, who's the mayor of Douglasville, and Commission Chairman Ramona Jackson Jones on a successful gala they had for their Douglas County Arts council.
All right, Theron, you're up.
All right, my first winner is going to be the House delegation on the Democratic side, U.S. House of Representatives. We haven't talked about this, and so with Democrats taking over the House, you now have John Lewis, who will remain as the senior chief deputy whip on the Ways and Means Committee. Congressman Bishop is basically looking possibly at a subcommittee chairmanship on appropriations. Also, Congressman Hank Johnson now will probably chair a subcommittee on transportation, and David Scott will move up on the Judiciary Committee. So definitely want to give a big shout out to them. And also I want to shout out now Chairman Robbie Ash, who's going to be rolling off the MARTA board. Well, he's going to be on the MARTA board as treasurer, but he will no longer be chairman. And so Frida Hardage is going to be the new chair, and Bill Floyd will need to be the new vice chair. But big shout out to Chairman Ash. I mean, you got to think about all the work that he's put on. 5 years as chairman of the MARTA board. He gets a lot of credit for negotiating deals with Gwinnett and Clayton County and moving that forward. And then lastly, you know, this is one that I kind of struggle with, but I want to make Kirby Smart my loser. I just think that
the coach of the University
of Georgia, you know, we're all, you know, Dogs fans, and to really make that call and take it away from these young student athletes who work so hard to get to that moment and call that play, I think he's definitely deserves to be a loser.
A lot of comment on social media about that one. Phil, we've got a minute to go.
That was a shocker. I agree with Theron. And yeah, I was going to have Tyler Perry as my winner too. In fact, Democrat defeated candidate Stacey Abrams ought to go to Tyler and get her debts paid off. But anyhow, my loser is Jeff Mann, the sheriff of DeKalb County. He's a disgrace to the badge. You know, he was arrested for exposing himself in an Atlanta park. He was trying to run away from an officer. He admitted to the crime, and yet he's still sheriff. I don't understand why he's not been removed.
All right, I've got two winners. Congratulations to the Zell Miller Leadership Institute class of 2019. 54 folks selected. It is a who's who list of folks who will be joining them. Also, Joseph Martinez. You all know I'm going to mention Atlanta United, and he was MLS MVP. Go Atlanta United. Thanks so much for watching. Enjoy your week. Hopefully Dick will be back next week and the family will be together again. Bye-bye.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing in this program.